you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
What the fuck? Hello, hello, hello. As you may or may not know, my name is Caitlin, and this is I Post What I Want, where every week or so I post what I want, and this week what I want to post is Spy Kids and identifying with the hero. 2001 was a big year for movies. Moulin Rouge, Hannibal, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Legally Blonde, Ocean's 11, Bridget Jones' Diary, The Fast and the Furious, and A Knight's Tale were all released in this year. And they're all fantastic movies, but 2001 also holds a special place as a year that revolutionized the children's entertainment industry. Monsters Incorporated, The Princess Diaries, and Shrek were all released in this year. Now, in 2001, there are also two important movies that centered around a child protagonist embarking on a fantastic adventure. Now, these are Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and of course, Spy Kids. Well, Harry Potter is one of the largest media phenomenons and franchises to ever exist, and definitely played a part in shaping the majority of young adults today. It's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Spy Kids.
Oh shit, talking mushrooms.
The first Spy Kids film, simply titled Spy Kids, was released on March 18, 2001. Since then, it has inspired two sequels with the original cast, a reboot, and an animated TV series coming out on Netflix on April 20th, 2018. The original movie had a relatively low budget of $35 million. Now, that is in comparison to the common $100 million budgets that we see for blockbuster films today in 2018. And Spy Kids grossed well over $140 million in box office, which is why we saw two sequels in relatively quick succession. Spy Kids 2: The Island of Lost Dreams was released in 2002, and Spy Kids 3D: Game Over was released in 2003. Now, how do I explain Spy Kids? They are the most ridiculous trilogy of films that I have ever seen in my entire life, and I love every single second of them. The basic premise of the story is that the Cortez family, which is made up of two parents, Gregorio and Ingrid, who are retired spies, and their two children, Carmen and Junie, who don't know about their previous life, are basically caught up in this adventure of spying. In the first movie, Gregorio and Ingrid are captured by Alan fucking Cumming, who has been making these like silly putty mutants out of agents that he's captured, and he like forces them to act in his children's show, but at the same time he's also building like this child robot army because he wants to take over the world, but he's actually like a good guy. It's really hard to explain, but like honestly, it is the strongest plot of the 2000s. Anyways, Carmen and Junie end up working for the OSS as the first ever group of spy kids, which sets up the next two movies. I definitely didn't look up the OSS because, you know, wanted to be a spy kid and found out that it did exist, but, you know, in World War II, and I definitely am not currently in university majoring in history because I don't know what I wanted to do with my life because my entire life plan was based around me being a spy kid. You know, it's definitely not what happened. The first two movies were received fairly well, while the third had mixed reviews. The second movie is definitely the strongest of the trilogy, as it was able to explore the world of being a spy without going through all of the establishing story work that they'd done in the first film. The second movie also added some interesting fantasy elements to the franchise. And the third movie is basically Ready Player One, but like, much, much better. But I'm here to answer a question that nobody in their right mind has ever asked me, or would ever ask me. Why was the Spy Kids reboot so bad? Okay. Besides it just being a bad movie with a weak plot, bad writing, and unfunny jokes, I would argue that there are other reasons why it failed. And it's not like the original Spy Kids didn't have weak writing or bad jokes, but they worked in a way that Spy Kids all the time in the world just couldn't figure out. And I think one of the main reasons that I don't like this movie is partially because I watched it as an adult. But I did rewatch the original trilogy for this video. Actually, I rewatched them because they got put on Netflix and I'll do anything to avoid studying. But the point is, I rewatched them, and they're still good. Like, sure, they are cheesy as all get out, and yeah, there's definitely a nostalgia factored in there that makes them probably seem better than they are, but they're still solid movies, and as a kid they made me feel something that I don't think the reboot was able to capture. See, before Spy Kids, there hadn't been a movie where the kids were the protagonist in the same way. Of course, there were movies like Matilda in 1996, which was robbed for Best Picture at the Oscars. But Spy Kids was the first ever movie that was all about kids and gave them the opportunity to save the world in a really badass way. Harry Potter in the same year did do the same thing, but Harry Potter is also like completely its own thing that I don't really want to touch. But we do look back on these franchises with the same kind of nostalgia, because there are movies that not only put us as children at the forefront of the action, but also said, hey kids, you can do this just as well, if not better, than the adults that are around you. And so, in a big way, these were the first protagonists that we related to on a personal level, and I think that's why they still hold such an important place in our hearts. And the reboot just didn't do this. The kids were placed in the background behind adult drama. I mean, there's a full scene that lasts a couple of minutes where the adults in the movie discuss whether or not their romantic relationship is going to continue, which, quite frankly, just doesn't matter in a Spy Kids movie. There weren't fun gadgets and cool missions like there were in the original trilogy. At least no new gadgets, because they just reused a bunch from the original trilogy, which I get was to introduce a nostalgia factor, but they didn't do it well. And I'm not saying that the original trilogy was perfect either. Carmen's role was severely reduced over the trilogy, taking her from being a great older sibling with fantastic instincts to Junie being the top OSS agent in just a year.
I have to save my sister.
Please. Carmen was so much better. And in the third movie, they basically froze her for most of it. Junie was not the star of the show, and he should have had an equal role with his sister. And you could definitely argue that sexism played a major part in why Carmen's role was so reduced. Spy movies and action movies are typically marketed towards boys as a very male thing. And so it makes sense that they would have taken the male protagonist in the movies and upped his role so that boys watching the films could have a protagonist to relate to, because obviously it's too much to ask for boys to relate to a girl. Again, I watched the new movie as an adult, so maybe I just didn't see the heroes in the same way. I mean, at the end of the day, this movie wasn't meant for me. But I still saw a major difference in the way that the child characters were treated between the original series and the reboot. Now, there were parts of the reboot that I really liked. The fact that Cecil was hearing impaired was probably my favorite part of the movie, because it is such an underrepresented minority in media. And it's so important for deaf children or children who wear hearing aids to come into a movie and see a protagonist that's just like them, out there kind of saving the world. I mean, that movie wasn't great on the whole Spy Kids being Spy Kids thing. The kids using sign language was also a great addition to the film. And I actually really liked that Marissa was their stepmother, and they addressed building a relationship with a step-parent and how difficult that can be. Some of the jokes were actually pretty funny, and some of the homages to the original trilogy were played really well. Some of them. But for the most part, the movie just wasn't great. The moral lesson of spending time with your family was way too obvious, whereas the family theme was not overdone in the original trilogy, although it was still obviously there. In fact, the whole time thing was really overdone. Literally, there are over 40 time-related puns in the movie. Like, I love puns as much as the next person, but really? Really? They clock in at 49 puns. Get it? Get it? Clock in, because they're time-related? Don't worry, I'll go stand in the corner for a minute and think about what I did. But you'll have to let me know when my time's up. All in all, Spy Kids is a franchise that existed with a protagonist for children to identify with and live through in a time when something like that wasn't readily available for children. And there are far many more movies made in this style today, but none come close to the child-based action that was present in the original trilogy. And maybe the Spy Kids movies are a product of their time and simply can't be remade for today's entertainment market. But whether or not a successful reboot of the Spy Kids is possible, I think at the end of the day we can all agree that Spy Kids All the Time in the World didn't do it properly.
We'll see, but you never know.
If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, the whole YouTube shebang. And if you have any ideas for things that I should do in future videos, comment them down below, and if I want to, I'll post it. Can we also talk about how many friggin' famous people are in the Spy Kids movies? Like what did they do? Did they just like call up these like A-list actors and were like, hey, do you want to be in a movie? And the A-list actor was like, sure, what's it about? And the people were just like, it's about spies, but get this, they're Spy Kids. And the A-list actors were like, oh, sign me the fuck up. Like, I mean, can we talk about like Antonio Banderas is in this, Steve Buscemi, Machete, Alan fucking Cummings.